Hello, my name is Jim Donovan, and I'm happy to be with you today. Be it virtually, I'm still glad to share with you a few thoughts. For 18 years, in what I like to say is a prior life, I served as a preacher at a local church in the metro Atlanta area. It was a church that focused on missions, and one of our missions endeavors was sponsoring residences for recovering alcoholics and addicts. And the men who lived in these residences were required to be with us for 90 days, and during those 90 days they had to go to 90 meetings. Once a week, one of those meetings was with the preacher. It was with me. And they received it with mixed feelings, as you can imagine, because some of these guys weren't very excited about church and God, and certainly not preachers. But if they lived in our residences, they had to be there for 90 days. They had to go to 90 meetings. And once a week, one of those meetings was what they called the spiritual meeting. So they met with me. And I'm convinced that during those 12 years of Tuesday nights, I had met, I guess over 1,000 of those guys and met with them. And I'm convinced to this day that they taught me much more than I taught them. I learned a lot about life and about people and about how God works. And frankly, they taught me a lot about myself too. But after those times of meeting and those 90 days in which they went to at least 90 meetings, they all knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that in order for them to remain clean and sober one day at a time, that they must not fall prey to instant gratification. They had to exercise delayed gratification instead. Or more to our point tonight, they had to exercise self-control. For some, this was the first time in their lives that they'd experienced the sensation of saying no to oneself. It began the lifelong journey in self-discipline, which they, and we who are believers, must take one day at a time. Of course, self-denial is contrary to our human nature, but it is right in line with God's nature. It is, in fact, the final trait that Paul mentions in his list of the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5:22 and 23. This trait is often translated self-control. It certainly, as we already suggested, means self-denial. It carries with it the idea of delayed gratification. I would argue that this trait of the Holy Spirit, this characteristic of self-control, that which the Holy Spirit desires to produce in us, that this trait is one of, if not the key trait of those 9. I look at self-control as the conduit through which the other 8 characteristics travel. It's the rail upon which the others ride. It's the straw that stirs the drink. It's the rein which harnesses my wild horse. But I digress. Self-control is from an interesting Greek word. The Greek word is a compound of 2 Greek words that mean literally ego and power. Power over self, if you will. Self-control. Ego power. Now for me, that suggests much. not the least of which is we as believers, as followers of Christ, have a responsibility in this process, this dynamic, beautiful process that the Holy Spirit wants to do in us. You and I have a role in it. And that role, quite simply, is self-control. Making ourselves available for God's Spirit to produce in us those beautiful traits which are indicative of someone who belongs to Him. Let's prayerfully give it some consideration. And I pray God's richest blessing on you in your spiritual journey, your academic endeavors, both now and forevermore. Amen.